Before we start, I want to inform you that this event will be recorded and we will be taking questions towards the end of the program. So please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen if you've got any questions. To our students, I know how chaotic and stressful this academic year and life in general have been. I'm tremendously proud of all of you for the resilience and the ingenuity you've shown. We're all in this together, so make no mistake, we will get through this. One silver lining in this unprecedented time is our ability to bring together people from all over the world to share our collective experience and to foster a sense of community through technology. So let's try to take our minds away from current events for a little while, as we're in for a really good treat in today's program. Our annual Distinguished Speaker Series was made possible through a generous gift from UCLA alumni, Ronald and Valerie Sugar. Ron, I don't know if you're with us today, but if you are, thank you and Valerie so much for all the support that you've given us over the years. Now, last fall, we featured some of the world's top earthquake engineering experts with a focus on California. This time, we're heading overseas to the UK and to Ghana virtually. Our distinguished speaker today is Tom Ilube, who's had a brilliant 30-year career as an entrepreneur, a technology executive, and an educational philanthropist. He is the CEO of Crossword Cybersecurity, a UK-based tech commercialization company, and he serves as a non-executive director on the board of the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation. Now, aside from a distinguished career in the tech sector, he has had an even more compelling story in supporting STEM education. He is the founder of Hammersmith Academy, a secondary school in London known as one of the UK's most innovative technology schools. Now, he is the chairman of the African Gifted Foundation, a UK-based charity focused on science and technology in Africa. And recently, through the foundation, he launched the African Science Academy located in Ghana. It's the first all-girls science and math academy on the continent. In 2016, he was named the most influential person of African or African Caribbean heritage in the UK. And in 2018, he was appointed a commander of the British Empire by Queen Elizabeth II in honor of his services to technology and philanthropy. Now, you haven't heard about Tom's UCLA connection, but there is one. One of our UCLA engineers, Morolake Omoya, attended a program for gifted students run by Tom before she came to UCLA as a freshman. Morolake has a bachelor's and master's degree and is now studying for a doctorate in civil engineering here at UCLA. She was invited to speak at the African Science Academy last summer. I talked with Morolake afterwards about her experience, and I was so impressed by Tom that I asked him to participate in the Sugar Distinguished Speaker Series. And so here we are. Good evening, Tom. I believe it's evening where you are, right? Hello.
It is, yes. It's just after 8 o'clock in the evening here in London. Good evening.
Excellent. All right. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us from across the pond. So I want to start you off on I have a lot of questions for you. So let me get you started off by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Right? Where did you grow up? Tell us a bit about the community in which you grew up and anything that we didn't touch on that you'd like to share with us.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real honor. My background, I was born and brought up initially in London. My mother was British. My father was Nigerian. I went to school initially in London. When I was 7 years old, we moved to Uganda in East Africa. And I spent a few years there, a few very eventful years. I was nearly killed in a car crash. If you look closely, you'll see a scar on the side of my head where my head went through the window. But I managed to survive that. I was tied up and nearly shot by soldiers when a dictator, Idi Amin, took over the country. And then we eventually escaped through Kenya and came back to the UK. I then went to school back in the UK again until I was about 14 or 15. And then my dad took me over to Nigeria and I finished my education over there. I didn't like it at first. It was such a cultural shift from London to Nigeria in the 70s. And my big hobby in London was ice skating. And ice skating isn't really big in West Africa, so that was a problem. I tried to escape. I ran away, got to the airport, got caught, taken back. But then I sort of settled down and developed a love of physics. And I went to university and studied physics in Nigeria before coming back to England and starting my technology career.
Wow, now that's quite a history. So given that history, I bet the pandemic doesn't mean much, or maybe it does. So, tell us a little bit about how the pandemic has affected you and your work. Yeah, I know there's a lot going on in the UK, and of course we've been hit pretty hard here. So I'd be curious to know how that's affected you.
Yeah, well, outside of home life, so we're all safely here at home in London. Outside of that, there are really three main things that I do. I'm chief executive of Crossword Cybersecurity. On that side of things, I've seen both positives and negatives. Everyone's working from home, everyone's safe, which is great. We've seen some slowdown in business. Clients have put projects on hold, new prospects haven't followed through. On the other hand, we've seen an uptick in cybersecurity incidents. I saw a report just today that said there are 5 times more cybersecurity incidents as a result of people working at home, as a result of people attacking companies and so forth. So we're finding ourselves quite busy from that point of view, which is interesting. On the BBC side, on the board of the BBC, we're obviously right at the heart of communicating about what's going on with the pandemic, both in the UK and across the world. We have nearly 500 million size audience across the world. We're seeing some of our highest ever viewing figures and listening figures, and at the same time as almost everyone is having to work remotely. So again, positives and negatives there. And with the school, the Africa Science Academy, obviously that's in Ghana. We have young people from all over Africa. We had to close the school because the schools were closed, the borders were being closed. We had to get everyone safely home, which we managed to do. We're now teaching them remotely and they're preparing for the end of the term. And then we're going to reopen next year, but we're going to use this year as a year of transition to try and double the size of the school. So in an interesting way, we're finding that there are both challenges and opportunities around this coronavirus period.
So the African Science Academy has students from all over Africa, is that right?
That's correct, yes. It's an all-girls academy where they study STEM subjects, science and technology, and they come from all over Africa. The school itself is based in Ghana, but we have girls from Ghana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Cameroon, Togo, Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, Zambia, Zimbabwe. We really have girls from all across the continent, and they're selected because they're academically outstanding in maths and science, and we take them through a really fascinating, intense program, and then they go off to universities all over the world, USA, UK, across Africa. We've got some this year that will be going to Hong Kong, to Abu Dhabi, Mauritius, Canada. Hopefully one day in the future, we might have some coming to UCLA, you never know.
Well, that's why I've got you here, Tom. I'm hoping to convince you to send us some of your wonderfully talented young people here to UCLA Engineering particularly. So it sounds, you've got this big, I mean, you span this huge African continent. So you have a problem very much like ours. That is, our students are all over the globe now and we're trying to do this whole remote learning thing. And you're probably doing something very similar, right?
Yeah. It can be a real challenge because you forget about the realities of it. Our girls tend to come from less privileged backgrounds. They are all on full scholarships. So every single one of them is on a full scholarship. So we're just looking for brilliant young women who wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to follow their passion unless they could come to us. And so we cover everything. The challenge there is that when they have gone home, for some of them, being able to stay in contact with us if they don't have internet access or Wi-Fi or their phones don't work can be a challenge. So there's a difference between the sort of theory behind distant learning on the continent and the realities of when you try and do it for real.
Oh yeah. We're finding that ourselves, right? I mean, access is not even. We've got students from all different economic, socioeconomic levels, from different communities, and I think the one thing I've discovered is that the pandemic has shown us how unequal things really are. I mean, that's been a bit of a yeah. So tell me a little bit about what got you started in technology. Now, you started in physics, is that right? You had a degree in physics, and then you moved into tech and coding.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I did physics at the University of Benin in Nigeria, this was early 80s, and we had one computer science course, but we didn't have any computers. And then they told us that there was a building somewhere and there was a computer inside that building, but they wouldn't let us see it. So I never saw a computer. We used to handwrite our programs and give them to the computer assistant. He would take them away, and then he'd come back the next day and say, I tried your program, it didn't work, try again. So I became very interested in writing programs, line by line. You'd actually literally write the program down, but I'd never seen a computer. When I came back to England in the mid-80s, I bought myself a ZX81 Spectrum, a really early computer, and taught myself to code on that. So I was self-taught at that stage. And then I got a job at British Airways as an assembler programmer, an assembly language programmer, programming huge mainframe systems, really, really technical stuff, writing assembly language, writing machine code. It's stood me well during my career, because even though the technology has changed a huge amount over the years, few people actually have programmed at a level that I have, and therefore I find that I can pick up the new technologies really quickly. But that's how I got into it, and my whole career really has been in and around technology.
Wow. Now, so from coding, so you were in investment banking for a bit and then moved into the entrepreneurial space. So that's another transition. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I worked in consulting at the likes of PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then moved to Goldman Sachs, a big investment bank. Spent some time there, and now we're in the mid-90s, and it was just at the time that the internet was really taking off. Some really interesting companies were emerging, and I didn't want to sit on the sidelines watching it. I wanted to be involved in it. So I took a big step of leaving what, a very prestigious company, a very good salary, and I'd worked hard. I don't know if you've ever applied to a place like Goldman's. I had 16 interviews in order to get the job there, and then I resigned and went to do my one-person startup and went from there. I think I just got to the stage after about 10 years in corporate life. I really wanted to try my hand at being an entrepreneur, and that's what I did, and I've never looked back.
Yeah, I spent about 10 years of my life in a small company, in a startup too, before coming back to academics and all of that. Did you enjoy that? Do you like being in this small little, group thing? I mean, I love the whole working out of a garage experience. I don't know if you did.
Yeah, no, I really did. It's fascinating. You can, as an entrepreneur, in an early stage startup, in the same day, sometimes in the same hour, you can believe that you're going to conquer the world, and you can believe that everything's going to fail. And sometimes at the same time. There's no other job, I think, that you have that sort of range of emotions. And you know, small things. I remember once I was trying to raise some money. I was on the phone to some venture capital guys, trying to negotiate with them. But at the same time that I was on the speakerphone to them, I was also lying under the desk, screwing the legs on the desk, because if I didn't do it, who else was going to do it? So you can be negotiating multi-million-dollar deals at the same time as sweeping the floor in startup life. And that's what I love.
Yeah, that's what I love too. I mean, yeah, you were sweeping the floors, you're taking out the dustbins, and you were coding. But I'll tell you what I loved about it is really the sense of being needed, right? Because it wasn't like you weren't a cog in the wheel. I mean, everything that you did mattered. And that's the thing that I really, really loved about being in a small company.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've got a lot of entrepreneurial interest at UCLA. I mean, all our undergraduates are really keyed into it. Lots of people trying lots of different things. Now, for our budding entrepreneurs in the audience, can you tell us one or two things that are key to starting up a company and making it successful?
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, for me, I'm really an early stage entrepreneur. So I start with a blank sheet of paper and I create a company. I'm not the scale up guy. I'm the startup guy. And I literally, when I start a company, I go and sit in an office with a flip chart and I write the words to do, number 1, start company. And then I take the rest of the day off because I've done enough for day 1. And gradually you start to think of an idea, you think of how you're going to get people to get involved in it. The key thing for me to start with is an intense focus on the customer. I see a lot of startup people, their starting point is focus on the technology. They've thought of a good tech idea and that's where they start from. Whereas the businesses that I've seen and been involved in that have worked well have focused on the customer and the audience that you're after, thought about, tried to look at their needs and then go to the technology and say, right, what technology can we bring to bear on that? Startup life is definitely a team sport. It's not, you know, there's this sort of myth of the lone entrepreneur changing the world. Actually, every entrepreneur has the team around them that complete them. And if you go off as an entrepreneur and say, right, I'm going to do this on my own, it really just isn't going to work. You need to think about the team. And that calls on you as an entrepreneur to think about your own strengths and weaknesses. You need to look internal as well, because what you're looking for with the team is people that complement you, not just more people that are like you. You need people that fill the gaps in, and that's really important. And probably the key thing for me, or a really important thing, is persistence and resilience. You just need to be able to go and go and go. When I go out to raise money from the venture guys or whoever, I'll expect to do 100 pitches, 99 will say no, and 1 will say yes. So I've got to get really good at hearing the no's, reacting to them, coming back again and again and again. And sometimes people say, you know, what's your core skill as an entrepreneur? And I say, failure. I am very, very good at failure. I fail and I come back. I fail and I come back. Other people fail 10 times and they give up. I'm just starting. I go again and again and again. So I would say, get ready for and get good at failure if you're going to go into the startup life, because it's just going to be part of your life until you break through and it starts to fly.
Wise words. So you were a physics graduate. How did you learn about raising money and talking to venture capital, all of that stuff? How did that
Trial and error, really. Trial and error. So I remember when one of my early companies, I went to, myself and my partner, we went to pitch to these VC guys. We pitched to them. It seemed to be going well. And at some point in the conversation, the chap said, okay, I guess you'll probably want a term sheet before you move forward. And I said to him, yes, you know, we're not going to have another conversation without a term sheet. We left the meeting and my colleague said to me, what's a term sheet? And I said, I have no idea, but it seems like something we want. So you just have to learn as quickly as you can as you go along. And I think that sort of resilience of learn quickly. Communication is a key thing. I think it can get you a long way if you can learn how to, it's one thing to know how to do the code and write the algorithms and so forth, but to be able to paint your picture, tell stories, paint your idea such that people get it and get enthused about it, it's absolutely key in being an entrepreneur. I've found over the years it's as key in the philanthropy side of things as well, because you're doing the same thing. You're trying to convince donors to support you. You have to be able to paint the vision in exactly the same way.
Did you have mentors along the way, people who taught you some of these things? I mean,
I didn't explicitly. I've always felt that I would have, maybe if I'd had a mentor, I might have made something of myself, but there were people that I looked up to, and there are people that I learned from. I picked things from a lot of people. My elder brother, Jim, who sadly has passed away now, he was a brilliant chap, and I learned a huge amount from him, but not so much through mentor type of conversations, but watching and listening and observing. There are other people, there are physicists that have just been fascinating personalities that I've learned a lot from. So in a sense, I've had mentors in the sense that I've drawn from lots of people, and I try and learn from as many as possible. I haven't personally had someone that I have sat down with and had those mentor type conversations with, but I do feel it's something that I missed out on.
Yeah. Well, I've read a lot of your stuff and looked you up, and so I know you've talked quite a bit about the fourth industrial revolution and this explosion in artificial intelligence and all the opportunities that it presents for science and technology in Africa. Can you tell us a bit more about that? What are you thinking of?
Yeah. I think that, I agree with the people that are saying the next sort of 20, 30 years, starting now and going on, we are in a period that we might call the fourth industrial revolution. There's a set of technologies, the Internet of Things, robotics, voice assistants, autonomous vehicles, all coming together, all underpinned by the acceleration of AI and the algorithms that are coming through. It's a fascinating world, and I think it will change the world around us really quite profoundly. And what I'm interested in is, what does that mean for the continent of Africa? Because I think that Africa as a continent and the individual countries can't afford to sit on the sidelines and say, well, we're just going to deal with today's challenges and problems, and we're going to leave all of that fourth industrial revolution stuff to folk in the US and the UK and China and Japan and so forth. Because if they do that, then they're going to spend the next 50 years trying to catch up again. I think that the countries across the continent need now to fully engage with all of these emerging technologies and think about what their role is. And the great thing about it is that the raw material for the fourth industrial revolution is brain power. It's clever people who are able to do clever things. And therefore, if you look at a continent like Africa, 1.2 billion people, people say that Einstein was so clever, he had an IQ that put him in 1 out of 30,000 people. That's how smart you have to be an Einstein, 1 in 30,000. Africa has 1.2 billion people. If you do the math, that means that there are 40,000 people today across the continent with the brain power of an Einstein. We need to find, engage, motivate, unleash those people and the 10 times as many beyond them and the 10 times as many beyond that to really engage with these new technologies and think about, what do they mean for Africa and what do they mean for my country in Africa and my region of Africa, rather than waiting until this new set of ideas and technologies are invented elsewhere and then imported.
Right. So, but Africa is a huge place and, of course, an extremely diverse place.
Yeah.
How have you been able to engage with all of these different countries and, so many different voices there? I mean, do you talk to them? Do you have access to people and
Yeah.
people in power?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. We talk to a lot of people in a lot of countries through schools. We have relationships across the continent. We talk to people at government level. We talk to people mostly in education. That's what we're interested in. What I'm really interested in is if you are a 15, 16, 17-year-old young woman, exceptionally able and gifted in maths and science, but you happen to be living in a city, town, township, village, and don't really have the resources and opportunity to take advantage of that, I'm looking for you. I'm searching for you because I want to bring you into our environment and see you flourish through your time at the Africa Science Academy, and then unleash you onto the continent and onto the world. And so we have to network, and that goes back to the thing about teamwork. This really isn't just me doing this. I have a great team, brilliant head teacher, brilliant team around her, team here in London, contacts all across the continent. And that's how you get things done on the continent and anywhere really, but that's how we do it.
I want to explore, I want to understand a bit more about the African Science Academy. Now, so why young women in STEM? Why that particular direction? What made you go in that direction?
Yeah,
And how old?
My mum was yeah, okay. So my mother was a teacher for 17 years, and she taught in London, she taught in Uganda, in East Africa, she taught in Nigeria, in West Africa. Thousands of students will have gone through, and I spent a lot of time therefore in and around schools, and I'm sure that rubbed off. So one of the things I found in the charity world, when you're deciding to do philanthropy, the best thing to do is to focus rather than sort of scattergun and do everything everywhere. It's much better to say, this is the area that I'm going to focus on. So I decided, right, I'm going to focus on education. But even then, I didn't say, right, I'll do a little bit of kindergarten, a bit of high school, a bit of college. I said, effectively, I'm going to focus on high school education, because I think those years, 14 to 18, when you're making those life decisions about where you're going to go and what direction you're going to go in, if you can influence and enable people during those years, you can really do something special. So that's where we decided to focus. As a scientist, having done physics and having had a great technology career, I feel that technology has huge leverage. One of my companies, we worked with Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the web, for several years. He was an advisor to the company. I spent a lot of time with him, and one person with a brilliant idea, brilliantly executed, has changed the world. And so I know that one girl, brilliant idea, brilliantly executed, could change the continent. It doesn't have to be armies and armies of tens of thousands of people. The right young women with the right education and support can really have a massive impact. The choice then, when you create a school, is what sort of school, where's it going to focus? So science and technology was my background, and that was the focus. What I noticed across the continent, the place I'd worked in Africa, and also actually in Britain as well, is a lot of young women who are interested in technology and engineering, don't necessarily pursue the career. And sometimes you'll even get their parents sort of persuading them not to become engineers or whatever. Oh, that's not for you, your brother should do that, etc. So I thought, right, we're going to create a school for young women who want to be engineers and scientists and mathematicians, who aspire to be the next Nobel Prize winner in physics and so forth. That's what we're trying to do, and nothing else. So that's why we focused on young women from less privileged backgrounds who love science and technology. This is the school for them.
That's phenomenal. So we're kind of trying to do the same thing at UCLA, trying to, persuade more women to come to engineering. And I'm kind of proud to say that we've had some success, right? We're not nearly as as successful as I would like. So in the last 4 years or so, our freshman class has gone from 23% women to 31% women. So we're getting there.
Brilliant.
Not easy, all right? So I'm really curious about first of all, how do you make the African Science Academy known to all these young women on this huge continent? How do you persuade them to go into STEM? How do you persuade their parents to let them go?
Yeah, yeah. So we work through other schools. We do exams that are called A levels, advanced levels. It's the British exam that you do at the end of your high school, essentially. Now, because we do that, we are not competing with other schools on the continent. Students will have finished their school certificate and then they'll come to us. So we reach out to a huge network of schools. We tell them about the academy. We tell them that it's specifically for girls and it's specifically for young women who are interested in science and technology and strong in mathematics and so forth. We tell them that they're going to get these full scholarships. And actually, we get a huge number of applicants. We get typically 20 applicants for every one place. So whenever I hear people say, well, do girls really want to do science and technology and so forth? I say, well, we are 20 times oversubscribed. We could multiply the school by 10 and we would still be 2 times oversubscribed. And that's before we've really started to push out there. The reputation of the school is growing. So CNN did a piece on it. Various newspapers have covered it and so forth. So people are starting to hear about it. And sometimes we get applications from countries that we haven't even been to. We'll just get a random application from South Sudan or wherever it is. It's just astonishing. But there is a real hunger and a desire amongst these young women. You're absolutely right that parents or guardians can be quite nervous about it. And sometimes it's for very practical reasons in their eyes. So they will often they'll be sending the boys to college and university and keeping the girls at home to farm and cook and etc., etc. One of our students, it's an absolutely true story. She was a street vendor. She had finished her school. Her parents had no more capacity to send her to school, and so she was helping out by selling things. I think a friend of hers mentioned the school to her. She applied. Her exam results her entry exam results were extremely impressive. We gave her a full scholarship. We got her in. She finished her time with us and then went off to university overseas on a full 4-year scholarship. Completely transformational for her as an individual, but also for the family and for the wider community and so forth. So it is a challenge sometimes to convince the parents and guardians to send their students to us. But once they engage, they really see the benefit of it.
Yeah, I mean, what a transformation, right? I mean,
yeah.
Street vendor to, the science.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. That's quite a story. And so I want to explore I want to take a couple of minutes to explore the philanthropy side. So what drew you to philanthropy? I mean, we've got lots of students who want to make a difference, all right, who don't necessarily want to make a lot of money. I mean, though money's nice, but they want to do something meaningful with their lives. I mean, when did that idea come to you? Just later in life?
I think for me, it was probably a little bit later in life. I mean, it may have been sort of built in there, seeing the work that my mum did over the years. It was probably sort of deep in there, that idea of helping and taking people on the journey. Mm-hmm. But the first part of my career was about building my career, building my network and so forth. What I then realized and became more important to me is that nobody really cares how much money you've made or so forth. Nobody really cares really what car you drive, what job title you have, all of those things, you know, when at someone's funeral, they're never going to say, well, he drove a Maserati or he was a vice president of XYZ company. That's, you know, what they talk about and what you think about when things matter is, what have you done? What difference have you made? What's been your story? You know, one way to think about it is if you're telling your own story, what is it you want to say? There's this African proverb that I really like that says, until lions have their own storytellers, tales of the hunt will always be told by the hunter. If you don't tell your story, somebody else is going to tell it for you. So you have to tell your own story, and to do that, you have to have a story to tell. So what is it you're trying to do? What impact do you want to have on people's lives? And that's what led me into philanthropy. And I can say that I have got more enjoyment out of what I've done over the years in philanthropy and with my schools and so forth, and the feedback that I've got from that, than I have in my corporate or even my entrepreneurial career.
That's wonderful. I want to open this up a little bit. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives with us. We've got an eager audience waiting to engage you. So let me start this off with a few questions from our community that were submitted in advance, and then I'll open it up, right? Now, our first question comes from one of our students in our We at UCLA Academy. We at UCLA is Women in Engineering at UCLA. Her name is Itohan Ero, she's a computer science major who is aspiring to be a software engineer. And Itohan asks, I was inspired by your mission to increase education for women by creating the African Science Academy. You mentioned that with a passion for science and the right opportunities, a girl can change the world. What are some of the surprising lessons you learned in creating the African Science Academy?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there are probably two or three things, both positive and negative in a way. The level of brilliance of some of the young women that have come to the African Science Academy and come through it has been really surprising. You know, you sort of think that you're going to come across people, because that's what you're looking for, who are really impressive. And in my career, you know, I've worked with people in Silicon Valley, in London, in China, all over the world. I've worked with brilliant scientists and engineers and so forth. And in my education work in the UK, I've met some amazing people and so forth. But some of the girls that have come to the Africa Science Academy have been so bright that I've done a double take. I've thought, wow, how can you do that? How can your brain work like that? And that's been really, really surprising. I think one of the things that's been surprising in a slightly disappointing way is that I still get some people saying to me, well, why don't you do it for boys as well? And I sort of think, come on, you know, you know why I'm doing it, how I'm doing it. Actually, if you want to do it for boys, here's the blueprint, go ahead, you know, I'll tell you how to do it. But the fact that, you know, some people sort of say, you know, why are you focusing on girls? Why are you doing it for girls? I sort of feel like, no, we should have moved beyond that and understand why. In terms of getting support, I suppose I've been surprised on both sides. It was more difficult to get support than I expected to start with. So I was surprised that people didn't see the vision and want to support it right from the start. But once the school got up and running and people could see that there's an actual school there, then you see people really getting involved and supporting. So it's been a great journey. And I'd say to Itohan, you know, she's doing computer science now, and you know, she's gonna have an amazing career. She will be snapped up like that.
Yeah.
Incredible.
For sure. Here's another provocative question. This comes from our Center for Excellence in Engineering and Diversity, from a student there, Bradley Pickard, who's also a computer science major and who wants to be a software developer. And he asks, What do you see as the biggest barrier to diversity and inclusion in tech? And how is this barrier being broken down? As you know, in the US, it's a huge issue that we run into, and I'm sure you do in the UK as well.
Yeah. I mean, it is a huge issue. And, you know, in my career as a Black executive in London, I have faced all sorts of challenges on my journey, trying to figure out when to push, when to let things pass, how to maneuver, how I want to be perceived. Do I want to be seen as Tom, the Black executive? Do I just want to be seen as Tom, the executive, et cetera, et cetera? People say, you know, oh, Tom, you're a role model. Am I ready to be a role model, or am I just getting on with my career? You find yourself wrestling with all of those sorts of questions. Tech still has a problem. It likes to think that it's ahead of the game, it's very modern and so forth. And yet, when you go and look at the big tech companies, they are surprisingly undiverse, and they've got a lot of work to do. I think the good thing is that they now, I think, know that they've got a lot of work to do. So they are starting to wrestle with it. And therefore, I think if you're just getting into the industry, you're knocking on an open door, you know, particularly if you've got the sort of background of coming from a college like yours, and with the ability that someone like Bradley will have, you know, it'll be an open door to get into these organizations. Mm-hmm. You have to be brilliant still. You know, we're still at that stage where you just are going to have to be that bit smarter, working that bit harder, understanding the game to navigate your way through. And where it can become difficult, and this is where you need mentorship and advice, and in particular sponsorship, which in a way is different to mentorship, is when you get to that mid-career stage. That's when it can get a bit sticky and difficult, and you're just not quite getting the promotions. How do you punch through that? Learning the art of working your way through that bit of the tech landscape it can be a challenge. But it's a great question.
Yeah. Here's another question from one of our Belter Society members, Rio Yoshitani. And he asks, the performance of AI depends largely on the size and quality of the database. Are there any plans in designing databases particular to Africa that address regional differences? What is the infrastructural plan for Africa? Now, of course, Africa is a huge place, and so I don't know if there's an answer, but I'd be curious to hear your answer.
Yeah, I mean, he's absolutely right. At this stage, a lot of the machine learning techniques are only as good as the data that underpins them. Having said that, there are some techniques that are exploring how to drive machine learning without data. So if you look at things like AlphaGo from DeepMind, the Google division, and then you look at AlphaGo Zero, which was the next generation of AlphaGo, and then you look at AlphaZero, one of the interesting things about the latter two is that they learned without starting from a whole pool of data and games. They learned by competing against themselves. So there are some techniques where machine learning can take place without data, but on the whole at the moment, it does depend hugely on the data. And this is one of the challenges and one of the reasons why I do want African countries to engage so much. A lot of the biases that creep into the behavior of these algorithms emerge because the data that they're working on is biased. I've seen recruitment algorithms that are recruiting people into a company, and the algorithm starts to select male candidates for what it's learned are male jobs and female candidates from what it's learned are female jobs, because it's gone through all the data and it's analyzed them, and it's worked out that it seems as if mostly men do those sorts of jobs, mostly women do those sorts of jobs. You know, getting rid of the biases in data is hugely important. And so I think that Africa is going to have expertise in that area. At the moment, I don't see a lot of activity. That is an area that I would like to see, that this, as Raoul says, the infrastructure activity of building the capability. That, I think, is really important for Africa. I'd like to see an African Institute for Artificial Intelligence. I would really like to see that, and some real hard thinking going on there.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal idea. Let me turn to questions from our audience. I've got a lot of questions and I apologize ahead of time. I know I'm not going to be able to get to all of them, but let me ask you a few, all right? So one question here says, do you have students from North Africa? I'm sure they'd be very interested in this opportunity that you're providing.
Yeah, we'd love to. We haven't yet. We're spreading out across the continent. One of the things that people who are listening to this and other people can do is, if somebody has contacts in a country and thinks they could connect us with a school or with a couple of schools, we would love to know about that, and then we'll reach out to them and try and bring them in.
Yeah. Great. Now, how many startups did you start before you actually succeeded?
I don't know if I've succeeded yet, but I'm on my 5th startup, and this one seems to be going okay. I think they all succeed and fail to some extent. One of the important things with a startup is to get reasonably clear right at the start as to what success looks like for you. Are you trying to build the company to sell it? Are you trying to build it for the long term? Are you trying to build it to a certain extent and then invite another entrepreneur to come in and take over from you? There are sort of many definitions. As I said, I'm an early stage guy, so I start with the blank sheet of paper and I try to create a company, a brand, get it moving, get it up to a certain level, and then at some stage somebody's going to come in and take over.
Wonderful. So here's the question from Ron Sugar. As you know, Ron and Valerie Sugar endowed this series. So Ron says, Tom, this is Ron Sugar. Great to have you as our distinguished speaker today. Would you say a few words about your company, Crossword Cybersecurity?
Yeah, so Crossword Cybersecurity, as it says on the tin, it's a cybersecurity company. But what we do is we talk to universities to look for the interesting cybersecurity research that they're doing in the university that they would like to commercialize. And then we work out with the university how we can take the IP out, turn it into a product, and then take that product to market. So that's the journey. So in essence, we are a tech transfer company that focuses specifically on cybersecurity. We're still at a very early stage. We've got a really good team here in the UK and some folk in Poland as well, starting to get momentum, get early stage. We're at quite an exciting stage still. The stage where your heart is both up and down at the same time. We're still at that stage, but that's what Crossword does.
Wonderful. So here's a question from a student who wants to ask about starting your own company. For someone who wants to start something similar down the road, what would you say were your first steps? What would be a good goal to focus on besides being better at our own field?
Interesting question. So I would say that the first step, in a way, is intent. That may sound a bit strange, but when I start a company, for me, it always starts from, that's what I'm going to do. The reason why I say that is that I often hear people who say, I would start a company if only I could think of the idea, or I've got an idea, if only I could raise the money, and so forth. And I say that's not really where a company starts from. Where it starts from is you as an individual just saying, I am going to do this. I am going to make this happen. It's a bit like deciding to be a mountain climber and saying, I'm going to climb Everest. At the point that you say, I'm going to climb Everest, you don't exactly know how you're going to do it, where the funding's going to come from, what the direction is, but you've made the decision. So that is where I start from. Then I think you're looking for what audience, what customer base are you interested in, and analyzing that customer base and then you move on to what's the technology that can get you there.
Wonderful. Hello, Tom. It's Audrey O'Neill with the Women in Engineering program. I want to thank you so much for being our guest here today. And the students are just in love with your conversation and everything that you're doing. The dean had to step away momentarily. I think she might be back, but I wanted to say hello and welcome. Dean Murthy, are you ready to resume?
Yes, indeed, I am. Sorry about that. I've had a spotty internet connection for a bit, and I was afraid I'd drop off. But anyway, so let me pick up on where we were. Okay, so a bunch of other questions. We don't have a whole lot of time, so let me ask you one last one. With all the hype around the improvement in tech and specifically AI, what are some of the dangers you think that might present themselves when these technologies get extremely powerful?
I think one of the main risks of AI, I'm very excited about it. I think it's a great direction and it will have a profound and a positive impact. I am nervous about the biases that can creep into AI. Algorithmic bias, algorithmic racism, where decisions are being made about our lives that we don't understand, and that even the people that wrote the AI algorithms in the first place don't really understand either. That, I think, is an area of concern, and therefore I think the field of AI ethics and how do you live and manage society in an AI-driven world, I think is really fascinating and really important as well.
Thank you so much. Terrific answers. We're coming to the end of our time. I wish we could talk for longer, but we've got to wind down here. So I want to thank you so much for speaking to our UCLA students. We wish you could have joined us in person, and I really want to extend an invitation to you to actually come and visit us. It was really phenomenal. It was wonderful talking to you. I'm getting so many positive comments here. So come and see us one of these days, all right? We'd love to see you on campus. I want to thank all our students, our alumni, our industry partners for being here today. I want to thank you, Ron and Valerie Sugar, for making the series possible. But before I let our audience go, I want to invite you all to join us next Saturday for a special virtual Bruin Engineers reunion where we will have a unique opportunity to talk to one of the internet's founding fathers, Vince Cerf, master's 1970, PhD 1972. He is Google's internet evangelist. He has a wonderful perspective on tech's history and where it's going, and it's going to be a terrific program. So I hope you'll all come and join us. And so on that note, thank you, Tom. Thank you again for spending your evening with us. And for all our audience, have a great rest of the day. Please stay safe. And I really hope to see all of you back on campus again soon. Thanks again.